Lily Hayes tightened her grip on the steering wheel as her old pickup truck climbed the winding mountain road that cut through the forests outside her small Montana town. It was nearly midnight, and the only light came from the pale shimmer of the moon breaking through the clouds. She had just finished a 12-hour shift at the local clinic, her body aching with exhaustion, but her mind sharp from the caffeine she had gulped down to stay awake. The air smelled faintly of pine and frost, and patches of snow clung to the roadside, glittering faintly. As she rounded a curve, her headlights swept across something that made her breath hitch. A sleek black SUV lay tipped on its side near the guardrail, its hood crumpled flames licking up into the night sky. Smoke curled thick and dark, disappearing into the treetops. For a moment, Lily froze, her pulse hammering before her training kicked in. She slammed the brakes, skidding slightly on the gravel shoulder, then yanked the gear into park. She grabbed her phone with shaking fingers and dialed, but the screen flashed no service. She lifted it higher, stepped closer to the road, tried again. Still nothing. The mountains were notorious for dead zones, and this was one of them. She cursed under her breath, glancing back at the truck, then at the wreck burning ahead. There was no time to think about protocols or liability. If she waited for someone else to stumble by, whoever was inside would already be gone. Lily yanked open her glove compartment, pulled out the small first aid kit she always carried, and bolted toward the wreck. The heat hit her before she even reached the twisted metal. Sparks hissed, the flames snapping louder. The air reeked of gasoline thick enough to sting her eyes. She coughed, covering her mouth with her sleeve. Inside the SUV, the windshield was shattered, and the driver's side caved in. Through the smoke, she spotted a figure slumped against the airbag. A man, his head lolled against the seat, blood trickling from a cut along his temple. His chest rose shallowly, but he was alive. "Sir, can you hear me?" Lily shouted, her voice nearly drowned by the crackling fire. There was no response, only the faint rasp of breath. Her heart slammed in her chest. She tried the driver's door, but it was jammed tight. Heat scorched her hands even through her gloves. She ran to the passenger side, tugged on the handle. This one gave with a groan, swinging half open. Flames licked at the dashboard, dangerously close to spreading. Lily crouched, squeezing inside. The smoke was suffocating, making her eyes water and her lungs burn. She unbuckled the seatbelt, the click echoing louder than the roar in her ears. He was heavy, far heavier than she had anticipated, his body limp and uncooperative. For one terrible moment, she thought she would not be able to move him. "Come on, Lily," she muttered to herself, bracing her legs against the frame. With a desperate grunt, she pulled inch by inch until his body slid across the seat and out of the SUV. The effort tore at her muscles, her back, screaming in protest. The instant they cleared the wreckage, a burst of flame erupted from the hood, lighting the night like a bomb. Heat seared her skin, forcing her to drag him further onto the gravel shoulder. She collapsed beside him, coughing violently. The man's face was striking even in the dim light, angular with a strong jaw. His dark hair matted with blood. His expensive suit was torn, the fabric singed at the edges. Nothing about him looked like a man who belonged in this lonely stretch of Montana wilderness. "Stay with me," Lily pleaded, pressing 2 fingers against his neck. The pulse was faint but steady. She checked his breathing, tilted his head back. A weak gasp of air rattled from his lungs. Relief surged through her, quickly followed by fear. She had to get him warm, had to stop the bleeding, had to do everything she could until help arrived. But there was no service, and she could not leave him alone to search for one. As she adjusted his head, his eyes fluttered open briefly. They were a piercing gray, clouded with pain, but startlingly intense. His lips moved, forming words barely audible over the distant roar of the fire. "Don't! Call the hospital!" Lily froze. Her stomach dropped at the strange plea. Any normal person would beg for an ambulance, for paramedics, for safety. But this man's voice carried a desperate urgency, as if the hospital was more dangerous than the flames that had nearly consumed him. His eyes rolled back, and he lost consciousness again. Lily stared at him, trembling, her mind racing. Who was this man? Why would he fear a hospital more than death itself? The wreck behind them groaned, metal twisting, as the fire consumed what was left. The night closed in silent, but for the crackle of flames and Lily's ragged breathing. She pulled her jacket tighter around him, shielding his body from the cold mountain air. In her chest, a single question burned brighter than the fire itself. Who exactly had she just risked her life to save Lily Hayes? Dragged the unconscious man away from the blazing wreckage, her arms trembling from the effort, her lungs still raw from smoke. The cold mountain air cut against her sweat-soaked skin as she dropped to her knees beside him. He was breathing but unevenly, and the cut on his temple bled sluggishly down his cheek. Her instincts screamed to keep him warm, to stop the bleeding, to call for backup. But her phone still flashed, no service. She tried turning it in every direction, even climbing onto a rock. Nearby, but nothing changed. The boulder-filled valley was a dead zone. If she left him to find help, he might not survive the cold, and with snow clouds building above them, there was no telling how long it would take. Shoving her phone back into her pocket, she muttered a quiet prayer and set to work. She tore open a packet of gauze from her first aid kit, pressing it against his head wound. She checked his ribs with gentle but firm hands, noting a wince of pain even in his unconscious state. A cracked rib may be more. He was lucky to be alive at all. She needed to move him somewhere safe before the flames drew attention or the SUV exploded again. Her cabin was barely half a mile up the trail road, a small wooden place she shared with her grandmother Margaret. It was the only option. With a grunt, she heaved his arm over her shoulder and started dragging him toward the truck. Every step was agony, her boots slipping on the frozen gravel, but she refused to quit. She could still smell gasoline on her clothes and imagined the fire behind her growing higher into the sky. After what felt like an eternity, she reached the truck, somehow managed to wrestle him into the passenger seat, and climbed behind the wheel. The old pickup roared reluctantly to life, headlights cutting through the trees as she turned toward home. By the time she rattled up the drive and stopped outside the cabin, her arms and back screamed in protest. The porch light flicked on, and Margaret appeared in her robe, gray hair pulled tight into a bun, eyes narrowing at the sight of Lily dragging a bloodied stranger out of the truck. "Lord in heaven, Lily, what have you done?" Margaret whispered, rushing forward, but keeping her distance. "You should have gone to the police, or at least driven him to the hospital." "I tried." Lily panted, no service, and the roads blocked by snow, past mile marker 9. "He would have died if I left him there." Margaret's frown deepened. "And if he dies here instead, what then? They will say, You took the law into your own hands. This is reckless. Lily swallowed her throat, aching from smoke, but her eyes held firm. I could not walk away. With Margaret's reluctant help, she got him inside, lowering him onto the small couch by the fire. The cabin smelled of cedar wood and herbs Margaret kept drying in bundles above the hearth. Lily fetched clean towels, boiled water, and unrolled her more advanced kit that she kept from the clinic. She cut away the charred fabric of his jacket and shirt, revealing bruises blooming across his chest and shoulder. Her fingers paused. The quality of the fabric was like nothing she had ever touched. And the watch on his wrist, though, cracked, gleamed with the weight of something far too expensive for this valley. Margaret noticed, too, and muttered under her breath, "He is no ordinary drifter." Lily ignored the comment, sterilized her needle, and began stitching the cut on his forehead. Her hands were steady, even though her heart thundered. She had done this procedure hundreds of times in the clinic, but never by firelight in her own home. When the wound was closed, she bound his ribs as best as she could with bandages, listening to the sound of his shallow breaths. For hours she worked, cooling his fevered skin with damp cloths, making sure his airway stayed clear. Margaret watched silently from her chair, eyes sharp disapproval, heavy in the air. Finally, close to dawn, the man stirred. His eyelids fluttered open, revealing storm-gray eyes that roamed the cabin in confusion. His gaze locked on Lily, and something unreadable flickered there. He tried to sit up, but gasped in pain, clutching his side. "Don't move," Lily said firmly, pressing a hand to his shoulder. "You have broken ribs and a head injury. You need rest." His throat worked, voice hoarse and cracked. "Where am I, my cabin?" Lily replied. "You were in a car accident. I pulled you out before the SUV exploded. There was no service to call for help." He stared at her, still dazed, then whispered, "Why did you not leave me?" She blinked at the strange question. "Because you would have died." For a long moment he studied her, as if measuring her sincerity. Then his gaze softened briefly, before hardening again. "I am Ethan," he said, his voice low, but carrying a kind of authority that felt out of place in her humble cabin. Ethan Blake. The name meant nothing to her, but the way he said it made her chest tighten with unspoken weight. Margaret frowned. "Blake. I know that name from somewhere." But Lily did not press. She simply tightened the blanket around his shoulders and said, "Rest now, Ethan. We can figure everything else out later." He looked at her lips parting as if to protest, but exhaustion claimed him again. Lily sat back, her body aching, her mind racing. Who was this man who wore wealth on his wrist, carried secrets in his eyes, and whispered not to call the hospital, as though death waited there? Outside, the first flakes of snow drifted down from the gray morning sky. Inside the cabin, Lily Hayes stared at the stranger she had dragged from the fire, knowing without understanding that her life would never be the same. The storm had not let up by the next day, and Lily barely slept. Every time the wind howled against the wooden walls of the cabin, she jolted awake, checking on the man lying weak but breathing steadily on the couch. Ethan Blake, as he had called himself, remained a mystery. His features were sharper in the daylight, aristocratic almost. And though his suit jacket had been ruined, she noticed the finely stitched initials on the lining, evidence of custom tailoring that only the wealthy indulged in. Margaret moved around the cabin quietly, her expression still disapproving, but her hands surprisingly gentle, when she helped Lily clean Ethan's wounds. By mid-morning, word had already spread through their small town. Living in a place where everyone knew everyone's business meant that strangers stood out, and people had spotted Lily's truck, hauling home a body in the dead of night. By noon, Rachel, Lily's closest friend since high school, came knocking. Lily opened the door a crack, trying not to reveal too much of the cabin interior, but Rachel's eyes darted past her shoulder anyway. "Is it true," Rachel whispered urgently, "that you dragged some man out of a wreck and brought him here instead of calling the sheriff? People are talking, Lily. They say you've lost your mind." Lily stiffened. "I did what I had to. He would have died." Rachel shook her head. "If the authorities find out, you could lose your license. You could be charged with negligence. You should tell them before this gets worse." Lily's voice trembled, but held firm. There was no service. The road was blocked by snow. "And he begged me not to call the hospital." Rachel frowned. "Begged you, Lily? Normal people don't beg to avoid hospitals. What if he's a criminal? What if you've put yourself in danger?" Lily's stomach twisted. She wanted to confide her unease, the way Ethan's words haunted her, but something inside warned her to keep silent. "He is hurt and he needs care. That's all I know." Rachel sighed heavily and left with a warning look, muttering that Lily was playing with fire. That evening, Lily stepped out to fetch more wood, the snow crunching under her boots, when headlights swept across the road below. A black SUV, not wrecked like the one she had seen, but sleek and moving slowly, prowled past the cabin trail. She ducked behind the woodpile, her breath fogging in the cold. The car lingered for a moment, then moved on. Unease tightened around her chest. Back inside, she locked the door and told herself it was coincidence, but the memory of the charred wreck made her doubts louder. Later that night, Ethan stirred awake again. His voice was stronger, though still rough. "You should not have risked yourself for me." Lily looked up from the chair where she had been reading. "I am a nurse. It is what I do." His eyes studied her, weighing, as if her honesty surprised him. Then his expression turned grave. "Promise me, no hospitals, no police. No one can know I am here." "You make that sound like a threat," she said cautiously. "It is not a threat," he replied, his voice low. "It is a plea. If they find me, they will not stop until I am gone." Lily hesitated, torn between professional duty and something deeper she could not name. The storm howled louder, shaking the shutters, and she finally nodded. "I will keep you safe, but you owe me the truth sooner or later." Ethan's eyes softened briefly before he closed them again, retreating into silence. Days passed, and the cabin became both sanctuary and prison. Lily ventured into town for supplies, only to feel eyes following her. At the general store, she overheard whispers behind her back. "She is hiding someone, mark my words. Fool girl, she is throwing her career away." Sheriff Tom himself showed up at the cabin one afternoon, his heavy boots crunching across the porch. He knocked hard, calling out Miss Hayes. "Mind if I step inside? Folks are worried. Heard you dragged someone from a wreck the other night." Lily's heart pounded as she opened the door just a crack. "Sheriff, I was there, yes. But there was no one alive when I reached the car. I barely escaped before it went up. Maybe people saw wrong." His eyes narrowed sharp as a hawk's. "Strange thing is no body was found when we checked the site the next morning. Just ashes and twisted metal. If there was a man, where did he go?" Lily forced her features calm. Maybe the flames consumed him entirely. It was brutal. Tom's gaze lingered suspicion thick in the air. You would tell me if you were hiding someone, right? Her throat tightened, but she managed a steady reply. Of course. After a long pause, he tipped his hat and walked back to his cruiser, though his eyes promised he was not convinced. Inside, Lily slumped against the door, her pulse racing. She turned to find Ethan watching from the couch, his expression unreadable. He whispered, "You lied for me." "I did," she admitted, her voice shaking. "I do not even know why. Maybe because I want to believe you are not who they think you are." Ethan's eyes darkened. "One day, Lily Hayes, you may regret that, Faith." His words lingered in the dim light of the cabin, heavy with the weight of unspoken secrets. And though she told herself she was protecting a patient deep down, she knew something larger had already begun. A storm of whispers in a town too small to keep secrets. The snowstorm raged for 3 more days, isolating the cabin from the rest of the town. The roads were buried, the power lines down, and the only warmth came from the wood stove that Lily kept stoked with trembling hands. In that enforced solitude, Ethan Blake lingered between pain and recovery, and Lily found herself bound to him by necessity, tending to his every need. She changed his bandages, spooned broth past his cracked lips, and in the long hours of night, sat beside him to monitor his breathing. At first he resisted, muttering that he could manage alone, but weakness humbled him, and slowly the silence between them began to soften. She caught him watching her sometimes, his gray eyes sharp, even through the haze of injury, observing the way she moved, the way she spoke gently to her grandmother, the way her hair fell loose from its braid when she leaned over the fire. One evening, after a particularly brutal gust knocked out what remained of the cabin's power, the small house fell into complete darkness, save for the flicker of firelight and a handful of candles. The sudden quiet was deep, almost sacred. Margaret retired early, leaving Lily alone in the living room with Ethan. He lay propped against a pillow, shadows cutting along his jaw, his bandages stark against his skin. Lily shivered as the temperature dropped further. Without a word, Ethan reached for the blanket draped over the couch, motioning for her to take it. She shook her head stubbornly, insisting he needed it more, but he gave her a look that brooked no argument. Finally, she sat beside him and let him settle it over both their shoulders. The warmth of his body startled her, a steady heat she had not realized she craved. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan said softly, "You do not ask questions. Most people would have torn me apart with them by now." Lily stared into the candle flame, her voice quiet. "I figured if you wanted to tell me, you would. Until then, you are just a man I pulled out of a fire. That is enough." He studied her with something like disbelief, then laughed, a rough sound that turned quickly into a wince. She helped him adjust his bandage, her fingers brushing his skin. He caught her hand lightly, his touch unexpectedly gentle. "I have lost everything I thought mattered," he whispered. The words hung between them, heavier than the storm outside. She wanted to press to ask what he meant, but his expression closed again, and she let the silence take over. The next morning, Lily noticed him staring at the cracked watch still on his wrist. His thumb traced the damaged face, as though it were more than a timepiece, as though it held a memory. When he saw her watching, he slipped his sleeve down to hide it. Later, as she prepared tea, he asked her about her life. She told him about the small town, about losing her parents young, and being raised by Margaret about how she dreamed of someday running a proper clinic instead of patching people up with outdated supplies. He listened intently, as if every word mattered. She found herself telling him more than she had told anyone in years, confiding the loneliness that came from being the one who always cared for others but was rarely cared for in return. Ethan's gaze softened, and when he spoke, his voice carried an edge of admiration. "You are stronger than most people I have known." That night the wind shrieked hard enough to rattle the windows and the cabin went dark again. Lily cursed under her breath, fumbling for matches. Ethan chuckled weakly from the couch, teasing that she should have been a soldier instead of a nurse. She rolled her eyes, but when she struck the match and lit the candles, the soft glow painted his face in gold and shadow, and something inside her shifted. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering from the cold that seeped through the walls. Ethan noticed, frowned, and without hesitation shrugged off his coat where it hung over a chair. "Take this," he ordered quietly. She shook her head again, but he leaned forward, wincing, and draped it over her shoulders anyway. The fabric was heavy and warm, carrying his scent of smoke, and something faintly expensive like cedar and leather. She met his eyes in the flickering light, and for one breathless moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. Their gazes locked her heart, racing, his lips parting as if words were not enough. Slowly he leaned closer, and instinctively she did the same. The distance between them thinned until she could feel his breath, until her pulse thundered with the weight of something new, something forbidden. Then she pulled back abruptly, her cheeks burning. "This is not right," she whispered. "You are my patient. I cannot." He looked at her for a long moment, then leaned back with a rueful half-smile. "You are right. Forgive me." But the air between them remained charged, fragile, and alive with the memory of what almost happened. In the days that followed, their bond deepened not through words, but through countless small gestures. She teased him into eating when his appetite lagged. He teased her back when she grew too serious. He told her bits of himself in fragments, never the whole picture but enough to reveal that he had lived a life surrounded by people, but rarely trusted any of them. She showed him the herb garden Margaret kept by the window, the books she read on nights when she could not sleep, the scar on her hand from when she was a child trying to learn how to cook. Slowly, painfully, they grew close, not just as nurse and patient, but as two souls trapped in the storm together. One evening, while Margaret dozed in her chair, Lily taught Ethan how to shuffle cards, laughing when his bandaged fingers fumbled. He laughed too, the sound fuller now echoing through the small cabin like music. In that moment, Lily felt something dangerous bloom inside her chest, a warmth she had sworn she would never let in again. Yet when she looked into his gray eyes, she knew it was already too late. The storm eased on the fifth night, leaving the cabin wrapped in a hush of snow, so deep it muffled every sound. Lily Hayes rose early, her breath visible in the morning chill as she stoked the fire. She glanced at Ethan Blake still lying on the couch. His sleep was restless, his brow furrowed his lips, moving as though caught in some dream he could not escape. She placed a fresh cloth on his forehead and turned to pour hot water when a sharp, broken whisper stopped her. His voice, strained and desperate, slipped out in fragments. "They want me dead. The board. The company. Damien." Lily froze. She leaned closer, hearing him thrash against the blanket, his fists clenching. His words chilled her more than the icy air. She whispered his name, shaking his shoulder gently, until he stilled, though his eyes never opened. Her heart pounded as she returned to the fire, the name Damien ringing in her ears. It was not the talk of an ordinary man. Later that morning, while Ethan slept heavily, Lily went to hang his torn suit jacket near the hearth to dry. As she lifted it, she noticed a crumpled piece of paper tucked into the inner lining. Curiosity gnawed at her. Against her better judgment, she smoothed it open. The headline screamed at her in bold letters, "Tech Billionaire, Ethan Blake Missing After Scandal." Her breath caught. There was his photograph, younger, smiling in a tailored suit, standing beside another man who bore a striking resemblance. Damien Blake, the article said, his younger brother. The story recounted how Ethan had vanished after accusations of embezzlement, how Damien had stepped in to stabilize the company, how rumors swirled of betrayal and disgrace. Lily stared at the picture, her hands trembling. She looked from the smiling face in print to the unconscious man on her couch. There was no doubt. She had not dragged some nameless stranger from the flames. She had rescued Ethan Blake, heir to a technology empire worth billions, a man the whole country was hunting. The realization left her dizzy. Questions raced in her mind. Why was he in Montana? Why hide from the hospital? Why let the world believe he was gone? She folded the paper carefully and slid it back. But the weight of the truth pressed heavy on her chest. That evening, Ethan awoke with more color in his cheeks. His eyes found hers, immediately sharp and searching. "You look different," he said hoarsely. She forced a smile. "You are healing, that is all." But she could not stop the tension in her voice, and he noticed, his eyes narrowed. "What is it?" Lily shook her head quickly. "Nothing. You need rest." Yet the secret burned between them. Days passed with the snow, slowly melting, opening the world again. Lily carried wood, fetched water, and cared for him, but every time she looked at him, she saw not just the patient she had nursed, but the man from the headline. He seemed to sense the shift. One night, as the fire burned low, he spoke. "You have questions. I see it in your eyes." She stilled, then nodded reluctantly. "Who are you really?" Ethan was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed, shoulders sagging. "You already know. I saw you find the paper." Her breath caught. "So you are him?" Ethan Blake. His jaw tightened. Yes, the Ethan Blake who the world believes is a thief. The Ethan Blake who has been branded a coward. The Ethan Blake who was forced to vanish. He looked at her with raw intensity. "Do you regret pulling me from that wreck?" She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "I do not know. I only know I could not have left you there." His gaze softened, a flicker of something vulnerable breaking through. "That choice may cost you everything." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "Then tell me the truth, not the fragments in your dreams. The truth." His face twisted with pain, not from his ribs but from memory. "The truth is, my brother Damien set me up. He wanted the company. He wanted everything. He orchestrated a scandal, planted evidence, made it look like I had drained accounts. The board turned on me overnight. If I had gone to the authorities, they would have buried me. If I had gone to the hospital, Damien's men would have found me. There was no one left to trust." Lily's breath came quick. The story was unbelievable, and yet the conviction in his voice rooted her. He reached for her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "I never wanted you to be pulled into this, Lily. but now you are, and there is no going back." She stared at him, the storm outside finally quiet, but inside her chest a new storm rising. She had risked her life to save him, and in doing so, had tethered herself to secrets far larger than anything she could have imagined. Her grandmother's words echoed warning of recklessness, of danger. Yet when she looked at Ethan, bandaged and broken, yet burning with determination, she felt something stronger than fear. She felt the dangerous pull of trust. That night she lay awake on her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. Outside, the snow glistened under the moon. Inside her mind, the mask had slipped, and she knew the stranger she had carried from the flames was no longer just her patient. He was Ethan Blake, a man whose fall from grace carried the weight of an empire, a man whose presence in her cabin might destroy her, a man whose gray eyes had already unsettled her heart. She pressed her hands to her face, whispering into the darkness the question she could not escape. What had she truly brought into her home when she dragged him from that fire? The morning after Ethan confessed the truth about who he was, Lily felt the world shift beneath her feet. She moved through her chores in silence, fetching water from the pump and feeding the fire. But every glance at him reminded her of the headlines, of the magnitude of the name Blake. Margaret noticed her distraction and pressed quietly, "Child, you are carrying something heavier than the snow on that roof." Lily shook her head, but her eyes betrayed her. Later, when Margaret napped, she sat across from Ethan at the small wooden table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "You said Damien set you up, that he wanted the company. But why should I believe you over the rest of the world?" His expression did not waver. "Because you can see the truth in me, you pulled me out of the fire. You have looked into my eyes without judgment. If I were the man they paint me to be, I would not be here begging you for trust." His voice was calm, but tinged with desperation. Lily wanted to believe him. She wanted to cling to the version of Ethan who had laughed when she taught him cards, who had placed his coat on her shoulders when the cold bit too deep. But reality pressed in. "You cannot stay hidden forever," she whispered. "People are already whispering in town. Rachel told me I am risking everything. Sheriff Tom is suspicious." At the mention of Rachel, Ethan's eyes flickered, but he only said, "I know. That is why I need more time. Damien's grip is strong, but it is not absolute. If I can gather proof," he broke off, wincing as pain flared in his ribs. Lily rushed to his side, adjusting his bandage. He caught her wrist, his gray eyes locking on hers. "If you choose to stand with me, it will not be easy. You will be called a fool. They will try to shame you. They will drag your name through the mud." She met his gaze, her heart pounding. "They already have. People in town call me the nurse who harbors criminals. They laugh behind my back." The bitterness in her voice surprised even herself. Ethan's expression darkened, his hand tightening around hers. "Then they do not deserve you. You are braver than all of them." His words sent a warmth through her chest that frightened her more than the storm outside. That evening, Lily ventured into town for supplies. The whispers hit her before she even reached the store. Neighbors turned away, conversations hushed as she passed. One man muttered loudly, "There goes the fool who hides strangers instead of calling the law." Another woman sneered, "She thinks she is Florence Nightingale, but she will lose everything." Lily held her head high, though inside each word cut like glass. At the counter, the store owner gave her a pitying look, but said nothing as he rang up her bread and milk. When she returned to the cabin, her cheeks were flushed with cold and humiliation. Ethan saw it instantly. "They are turning on you," he said softly. She dropped the bags with a thud. "Yes, and it is because of you." Her voice cracked with anger she had not meant to release. "I saved your life, Ethan, but in doing so I may have destroyed mine." Do you understand that his jaw clenched? For a moment he said nothing, then he pushed himself upright despite the pain. "Do you think I do not know what it means for you? Do you think I wanted this? I did not choose to drag you into my war, Lily. But you did choose to save me." The words hung heavy between them. She turned away, tears burning in her eyes, ashamed of both her anger and her longing. Later, as Margaret snored softly in her chair, Ethan moved closer. His voice was gentler now. "I know I ask too much, but if I survive this, if I clear my name, it will be because of you. And the world will never forget that Lily Hayes believed when no one else did." She looked at him, then her chest tight with conflicting emotions. Trust, fear, attraction, resentment, they collided inside her, until she could no longer tell one from the other. Outside, the storm clouds gathered again, darker this time, as though the heavens themselves knew a greater trial was coming. Inside, Lily sat beside a man the world called a criminal, torn between doubt and faith while the whispers of the small town grew louder, threatening to drown them both. The storm finally broke, leaving the world glazed in ice and silence. But inside the cabin, something else had taken root, fragile and dangerous. Lily Hayes found herself drawn to Ethan Blake in ways she tried to deny. Every small gesture deepened the connection, the way he thanked her quietly when she changed his bandages, the way his voice softened when he asked about her dreams, the rare flicker of a smile that made his stern face seem almost boyish. It was in these moments, not in the confessions about his past, that she saw the man beneath the headlines, the man hidden behind the name. One evening, as the wind died down, they sat together in the narrow living room. Margaret had gone to bed, leaving them alone, with only the crackle of the fire and the faint buzz of an old radio Lily had managed to tune. A soft melody drifted out, the kind of song that once filled dance halls decades ago. Ethan watched her tap her fingers against her knee to the beat, and then extended his hand slowly. "Dance with me," she blinked, startled. "You can barely stand." "Then hold me up," he said, his eyes gleaming faintly with challenge. Against her better judgment, she helped him rise. His arm circled her waist, his other hand warm against hers. They swayed awkwardly at first, his ribs protesting every movement, but soon they found a rhythm. The space was small, their bodies close, the firelight casting golden shadows across their faces. Lily's breath caught as his gaze fixed on her with a heat that made her knees weak. The world beyond the cabin ceased to exist. Their steps slowed until they were barely moving, at all their foreheads nearly touching. For one suspended heartbeat, she thought he would kiss her. She wanted him to, but the weight of duty crashed down, and she pulled away, her chest heaving. "We cannot," she whispered. "You are my patient. This is wrong." Ethan's jaw tightened, his eyes clouded, but he released her gently. "I understand," he murmured, though his voice was laced with longing. She retreated to her chair, pressing her palms together to steady herself. But even as guilt gnawed at her, a dangerous sweetness lingered, the memory of his hand at her waist, his breath so close. The following day, Lily went into town for supplies. Rachel intercepted her outside the store, eyes sharp. "You are still hiding him, aren't you? I hear people saw strange lights near your cabin. Lily, you are risking everything." Lily's heart lurched. "I cannot talk about this here." Rachel leaned closer, her tone urgent. "Then talk about it somewhere else, because if the sheriff comes back and finds something, it will not just be your license you lose. They will ruin you." Lily stiffened, unwilling to betray Ethan, but equally unable to lie smoothly. She brushed past Rachel, muttering, "I know what I am doing." Yet she did not see Rachel's eyes harden with something colder than worry. That night, Ethan was stronger. He sat up more easily, spoke with more clarity. But Lily could not shake Rachel's words. As she poured tea, she said softly, "Why do you trust me? You could have chosen to run farther, to disappear completely, but instead you let me find you." Why? Ethan looked at her over the rim of his cup, his gray eyes piercing. "Because in the fire, when I thought I would die, I saw your face. You did not hesitate. You did not weigh what you would lose. You just pulled me out. That kind of courage is rare. I trust that." Her cheeks flushed her throat tight. She turned away quickly, but his words lodged in her heart like an ember. Later, as the night grew late, Lily heard a crunch outside the cabin. She peered through the frosted window and froze. Headlights glowed faintly in the trees. A dark SUV idled just beyond the trail, its engine low and menacing. Panic shot through her veins. She hurried to Ethan, whispering, "They are here." He pushed himself upright, grimacing. "Stay calm. Do not open the door." Before she could reply, heavy footsteps thudded on the porch. A harsh knock rattled the wood. Margaret stirred in her room, calling out, but Lily motioned her to stay silent. "Miss Hayes," a man's voice boomed. "This is Sheriff Tom. We need to talk." Lily's blood went cold. She opened the door a crack to see the sheriff standing there, flanked by two unfamiliar men in dark coats. His eyes flicked past her shoulder. "Strange things going on here. Folks say you have company. Mind if I come in?" Lily's heart raced. "There is no one here, Sheriff, just my grandmother." One of the men shifted his gaze, predatory. Lily's pulse hammered. Then Ethan's weak voice came from behind her, steady but quiet. "Tell them I am family." She swallowed hard, turned back, and forced a smile. "My cousin from out of state is staying with us. He was caught in the storm." Sheriff Tom studied her suspicion clear, but after a long pause, he tipped his hat. "All right, but be careful, Lily. Not all strangers bring good fortune." He turned and left the two men following. But their eyes lingered too long, and Lily knew they were not deputies. When the sound of the SUV faded into the night, she turned to Ethan, her body trembling. "They are looking for you." He nodded grimly. "Damien's men." Her breath caught, then Rachel. She did not finish. Ethan's gaze was hard. Someone betrayed us. And Lily knew exactly who it was. Rachel's worried warnings had not been concern. They had been reconnaissance. Her friend had sold her out. The betrayal sliced deeper than she expected, sharper even than the fear. That night there was no dancing, no laughter, only the weight of shadows pressing close. Lily sat awake by the fire, staring at Ethan's sleeping form, her heart aching with equal parts anger and desire. She had chosen to trust him, and in doing so she had lost a friend and gained an enemy. And still, even in the storm of doubt, her soul leaned toward him, as if drawn by a gravity she could no longer deny. When the snow finally melted enough to clear the mountain road, Ethan insisted it was time to leave. Lily protested, terrified. of what waited beyond the safety of the cabin, but he was resolute. I cannot hide here forever. Damien has already sent his men sniffing around. If I do not face him, he will tighten his grip until I have nothing left to reclaim. Lily wanted to argue, wanted to beg him to stay, but she saw the steel in his eyes. This was not just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming his life, his name, and perhaps something larger that she could not yet see. Margaret pressed a hand to Lily's shoulder, whispering, "If you go with him, you go into a world that will chew you up and spit you out." But Lily knew the choice was already made. She could not let him walk into the lion's den alone. They left at dawn in Lily's old pickup, its engine groaning as it rattled down the icy mountain pass. Ethan sat rigid in the passenger seat, his wounds still fresh, but his presence commanding. He barely spoke, his gaze fixed on the road, as if every turn brought them closer to a reckoning he had dreaded for months. By the time they reached New York, the city lights burned like a different kind of fire, brighter and colder than the mountain blaze she had pulled him from. The towering headquarters of Blake Technologies loomed like a fortress of glass and steel, gleaming in the gray winter sky. Ethan straightened his shoulders as they approached, his jaw tight. "This is where it begins," he murmured. Lily felt small beside him, a nurse from Montana, stepping into a world she had only seen in magazines, but she refused to falter. Inside the lobby, cameras flashed the moment Ethan crossed the marble floor. Reporters who had camped there for weeks erupted into chaos. "Ethan Blake returns from hiding. Is it true you stole millions from your company? Who is the woman with you?" Lily flinched at the barrage, but Ethan kept moving, his hand brushing hers, briefly steadying her. Security ushered them into an elevator, whisking them up to the top floor. The doors opened onto a vast boardroom lined with floor-to-ceiling windows. At the far end stood Damien Blake, immaculate in a tailored suit, his smile wide and welcoming, but his eyes glinting with something cold. Brother Damien said smoothly, stepping forward as if to embrace him. "The prodigal son returns. We were so worried." Ethan's lip curled. "Save your performance, Damien. We both know why I disappeared." Damien laughed lightly, spreading his hands. "Of course, you disappeared because you were guilty. But now you are back, and the board will want answers. You can confess, and perhaps they will show mercy." Lily stiffened at his words, but Ethan's face remained carved in stone. The board members filed in whispers, rippling as they took their seats. Damien launched into a speech painting Ethan as a man, broken by greed, a liability to the company, a coward who ran when the scandal broke. He gestured toward Lily with a dismissive sneer. "And now he drags with him a nurse from some backwater town, proof of how far he has fallen. This is the man you want leading you." The cameras recorded every word. Lily felt heat flood her cheeks as reporters snapped photos, their murmurs slicing her like knives. She wanted to vanish, to dissolve into the carpet, but Ethan's voice rang out steady and strong. "This woman," he said, pointing to Lily, "saved my life when your men tried to end it. Twice now she has stood between me and death. She is more loyal, more courageous, and more honorable than anyone in this room. And if you cannot see that, then you are more blind than I thought." Gasps filled the boardroom. Damien's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing into slits. "You dare accuse me in front of the board?" Ethan stepped closer, every inch the man who once commanded an empire. "I do not accuse, I state the truth. You wanted me gone. You orchestrated the lies. but I am here and I will not bow to you." Tension crackled through the room. Damien's allies whispered, but not all the faces looked convinced. Some stared at Ethan with uncertainty, some with dawning doubt. Lily's heart pounded as she realized this was more than family rivalry. This was war for the soul of a company, for the truth itself. The meeting ended in chaos, reporters swarming security, struggling to contain them. Damien stormed from the room, his mask of charm cracking, to reveal the fury beneath. Ethan led Lily out, but she could see the strain in his face, the toll the confrontation had taken. That night in a hotel overlooking the city, Lily sat by the window, staring at the skyline. She felt like an imposter in this world of power suits and headlines, a nurse out of place among titans. Ethan approached quietly, his reflection appearing beside hers in the glass. "I should have left you in Montana," he said softly. "I never wanted you to endure this." She turned to face him, her voice firm. "You could not have stopped me. I would not have let you face him alone." His eyes searched hers, something fierce and tender all at once. "You do not understand what it means to stand against Damien. He plays with people's lives like pieces on a board. And now you are in the game because of me." Lily swallowed hard, but she did not flinch. "Then we will play. Together." For a moment, silence hung heavy, broken only by the city hum below. Then Ethan reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. It was not the desperate touch of the man she had pulled from the wreck, nor the hesitant closeness of their dance by candlelight. It was something steadier, something that felt like a vow. Together, he echoed. Outside the city pulsed with danger and promise. Inside, Lily Hayes and Ethan Blake stood on the brink of war, bound not just by circumstance, but by a connection neither of them could deny. And though the lion's den had teeth sharper than either imagined, they were no longer walking into it alone. The days after the confrontation with Damien were a blur of flashing cameras, hostile headlines, and whispered threats in hotel corridors. Everywhere Lily turned, she saw her name twisted into something cruel. The nurse nobody one tabloid called her, splashing her photograph beneath the caption, "The small-town girl clinging to a disgraced billionaire." At first, she tried to ignore it, but the words sank under her skin heavier each time. Strangers stared in lobbies, reporters shouted insults as she walked by Ethan's side, and even people she passed on the street muttered as if she were an opportunist who had traded her dignity for money. One evening she sat alone in the hotel room, the curtains drawn against the endless glow of the city. Ethan had gone to meet an ally on the board, leaving her in silence with her thoughts. She stared at her reflection in the dark window and hardly recognized the woman gazing back. Her eyes were rimmed red from exhaustion. Her shoulders slumped under the weight of shame that was not hers to carry. When Ethan returned, his face was grim. "It is worse than I thought. Damien has bought half the board, and the other half are too afraid to speak. If I push further without proof, they will crush me." Lily swallowed hard. "Then maybe it is over. Maybe you should let it go." He turned sharply, his eyes flashing. "Let it go." He stole everything. "My name, my company, my future. If I walk away, he wins." She rose to face him, her voice trembling. "And what about me, Ethan? What about the life I am losing because I saved you? Do you know what they call me out there? Do you know the looks I endure every time I leave this room?" He froze, guilt flooding his features, but she pressed on. "I believed you when no one else did, and now I am paying the price." Maybe I was a fool to think I could stand beside you in a world that was never meant for me." The silence stretched like a blade between them. Ethan's voice was low when he finally spoke. "If you regret saving me, say it now." Her chest tightened painfully. She wanted to deny it, but the words would not come. She turned away, her throat thick with unshed tears. "I do not know what I feel anymore." That night she packed a small bag, her movements quiet, so he would not wake. She left the hotel before dawn, the city streets damp with rain. She walked aimlessly, each step carrying her farther from him, from the war he was waging, from the life that had swallowed hers whole. She told herself it was the only choice left. Back in the hotel, Ethan woke to find her gone. Her absence cut deeper than any wound he had suffered. He sat alone in the silence, staring at the empty chair where she had sat the night before, and for the first time since the fire, he felt the weight of defeat. Without her, the fight seemed meaningless. Later that day, Damien's emissary arrived with documents. Ethan scanned them with hollow eyes. A settlement, a quiet surrender. If he signed, Damien would let him disappear with a fraction of what was once his. No more cameras, no more battles, no more Lily paying for his war. His hand shook as he held the pen. For the briefest moment, surrender seemed like mercy. But deep inside, a flicker of rage still burned. He had lost his parents, his company, his reputation. He could not lose the last shred of himself as well. He set the pen down, his jaw tightening. If this was the breaking point, he would break toward the fight, not away from it. Somewhere in the city, Lily wept alone, believing she had escaped him, not knowing that her story with Ethan Blake was far from finished. Lily thought leaving Ethan would bring her peace, but the silence of her rented room in the city only magnified the ache inside her chest. She spent her days avoiding newspapers and screens, yet his face was everywhere, plastered across headlines, his name tied to scandal and betrayal. Each time she saw his gray eyes staring from a photograph, she remembered the night she dragged him from the flames, the nights in the cabin when they had nearly kissed, the way his hand had lingered in hers, as if he had finally found someone he could trust. She tried to tell herself she had done the right thing, that she could not carry the weight of his battles, but her heart rebelled. It was Rachel's call that broke her resolve. Rachel had sought her out under the pretense of reconciliation, her voice dripping with false regret. "I was wrong, Lily. You deserve better than him. Damien will fix everything, and maybe you can still salvage your reputation if you let him." But beneath the sugary words, Lily caught the slip, the way Rachel's eyes darted nervously. The mention of Damien too polished. That night, Lily followed her, staying in the shadows, and what she saw made her blood run cold. Rachel met with Damien's men in a deserted parking garage, her voice carrying in the echoing space. "He is stubborn. He will not sign." "So what now?" One of the men answered, "Damien is done playing. Tomorrow night, the old warehouse by the docks. An accident no one will question." Lily's hands shook as she pressed herself against the wall. They were going to kill Ethan, erase him once and for all. For a moment, fear rooted her to the ground, but then a clarity she had not felt since the night of the wreck surged through her. She could not let him burn again. She could not let him die. Not while she still had breath. She spent the day preparing, gathering every ounce of courage she had left. By dusk, she was at the warehouse, its skeletal frame looming against the skyline, shadows pooling in every corner. The smell of oil and rust clung to the air, mingling with the faint tang of gasoline. Inside, she heard voices, Damien's smooth baritone among them. "You had your chance, brother," he was saying. "Now you are nothing but a liability." Ethan's reply was hoarse but defiant. "You will not win, Damien. Truth has a way of clawing to the surface." Damien's laughter was sharp as glass. Not if there is no one left to speak it. Lily's heart pounded as she crept closer. Through a gap in the wall, she saw Ethan bound to a chair, bruised but unbroken, his eyes blazing even in the dim light. Damien stood before him, flanked by men with cold eyes and heavy boots. A metal drum of gasoline stood ominously near a matchbox resting carelessly atop it. The plan was clear. They meant to set the place alight, burying Ethan in flames and ashes, leaving nothing but rumors behind. Lily's pulse hammered as she slipped inside, moving from shadow to shadow, until she was close enough to hear Ethan's ragged breath. She caught his gaze briefly, and though his eyes widened in shock, he gave the faintest shake of his head, urging her to leave. But Lily had not come this far to walk away. Summoning every ounce of nerve, she grabbed a loose pipe from the floor and hurled it across the room. It clattered against the far wall, drawing the guards' attention. As they moved, she rushed forward, her hands fumbling with the ropes around Ethan's wrists. His voice was a harsh whisper. "You should not be here. I am exactly where I need to be," she hissed back, pulling at the knots until they gave. The moment he was free, chaos erupted. One of the guards spotted them and lunged. Ethan staggered to his feet, still weakened but fueled by desperation, and together they fought. Lily swung the pipe clumsily but fiercely, buying him precious seconds. Damien shouted, his mask of civility cracking into fury. He grabbed the matchbox, striking a flame. "If I cannot have it all, then no one will." He hurled the match toward the drum. Fire roared instantly, hungry and wild, devouring the wooden beams, spreading faster than either of them could react. Smoke choked the air thick and black. Ethan coughed violently, pulling Lily toward the exit, but a collapsing beam blocked their path. The heat seared their skin, and Lily's mind flashed back to the night on the mountain, the fire, the desperate pull of his body through the smoke. History was repeating itself, and she knew what she had to do. "Go," she shouted over the roar, pushing at the beam with all her strength. "Save yourself." Ethan's eyes burned with refusal. "Not without you. You will die if you stay," she cried, her muscles screaming as she braced against the falling timber. "If you want your truth, if you want your life back, you have to live. Please, Ethan, live for me." For a moment it seemed he would not move, but then he seized her hand, dragging her with him as the beam shifted. Together they forced it aside, just enough to slip through. Flames licked at their heels as they stumbled into the freezing night air, coughing and gasping. Behind them, the warehouse collapsed in a storm of fire, the evidence of Damien's plot consuming itself. But Lily had not come empty-handed. She had swiped Damien's phone from the table in the chaos, and in it were recordings, messages, proof of his conspiracy. Damien himself had fled into the night, but his empire of lies had begun to crumble. Later, when the authorities arrived, drawn by the inferno, Ethan stood tall, despite his wounds, his arm wrapped around Lily. "He tried to kill me," Ethan told them clearly, his voice cutting through the smoke. "And she saved me. Again." Lily leaned against him, exhausted, her heart pounding with equal parts terror and relief. She had risked everything, and nearly lost it all, But in the fire she had found something undeniable. Redemption was not in leaving him. It was in standing by his side even when the world burned. And in that moment, as the flames devoured the past, Lily Hayes realized she would never let go of Ethan Blake, no matter what came next. The winter sun broke over Montana with a clarity Lily had not seen in months, gilding the snow-capped peaks in light as pure as glass. The world felt changed, not just because Damian Blake now sat in federal custody awaiting trial. His empire of lies dismantled by the evidence Lily had smuggled out of the fire, but because for the first time since that night on the mountain road, hope seemed possible. The news outlets that once called Ethan a thief now hailed his survival as a miracle, a story of betrayal and vindication that gripped the nation. But louder than the headlines was the story that truly captured people's hearts. The small-town nurse who had saved the billionaire not once, but twice. When Ethan returned to Montana weeks later, the town that had whispered against Lily stood in stunned silence as he walked through Main Street, hand in hand with her. Cameras trailed them, but Ethan ignored them, all his attention fixed only on Lily. Sheriff Tom tipped his hat with grudging respect, while even Rachel, disgraced and shunned for her betrayal, could not meet Lily's eyes. The nurse who had been mocked as a fool was now spoken of with awe. At the cabin, Margaret wept openly as Ethan knelt by her chair. "I owe my life to both of you," he said solemnly. And for once Margaret did not argue, only squeezed his hand with trembling fingers. Weeks passed, and slowly the frenzy of attention faded, but Ethan did not leave. Instead, he began to build something new, not from towers of glass in New York, but from the quiet strength of the mountains. One crisp morning, as Lily walked along the ridge overlooking the valley, Ethan joined her, his breath misting in the cold. He wore no suit, no armor of wealth, only a simple coat and scarf. In his hand, he carried a small velvet box. Lily stopped her heart racing as he knelt on one knee, the snow crunching beneath him. "You pulled me from fire and from shadows," he said, his voice unsteady with emotion. "You saw the man I was when the world saw only a ghost. I do not know what tomorrow holds, but I know I want every dawn to begin with you." He opened the box, revealing a ring that caught the morning light. Lily's eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "Ethan." He took her hand, slipping the ring onto her finger with reverence. "Marry me, Lily Hayes. Not because you saved me, but because you loved me when I had nothing left." Her answer came in a breathless laugh, half sob, half joy. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He rose, and their kiss was not desperate or forbidden, but certain the sealing of a promise forged in fire and trial. Word of their engagement spread quickly, but this time the town did not scorn. Instead, they gathered in celebration, astonished that one of their own had captured not just the heart of a billionaire, but had proven braver than the storms that sought to break her. Months later, a new clinic opened on the edge of town. Above its doors hung a plaque, "The Margaret Hayes Community Health Center," funded entirely by Ethan, but bearing Lily's family name. At the dedication, Ethan stood beside Lily, their hands intertwined as he spoke to the gathered crowd. "Wealth means nothing without purpose. Power means nothing without love. This place is not about me, but about her." A nurse who risked everything not for headlines, but for the simple belief that every life is worth saving. Applause filled the air, mingled with tears and cheers. Lily looked up at him, her heart overflowing. She had stepped into a world of fire and betrayal and come out with something greater than she had ever dreamed. As the sun set that evening, casting the valley in gold, Ethan pulled her close and whispered against her hair, "This is our new dawn." And Lily, once the quiet nurse who thought her life would always be small, knew that their love had not only survived the flames, but had become the very light that would guide them forward forever. My dear friends, if your heart is still racing after this journey of fire, betrayal, and love, then you know you have just lived through something more than a story. You have lived through a promise, a reminder that even in the darkest storms, love can become the flame that saves us. Think back to that night on the mountain road when Lily Hayes made a choice no one else would have made, when she risked everything for a stranger whose name she did not even know. That moment, that single act of courage, set in motion a love that refused to be broken by scandal, betrayal, or the lies of a brother. And is that not what we all long for? Someone who will see us when the world has turned away, someone who will hold our hand, even as the fire closes in, someone who will whisper, "Live for me," and mean it with their whole soul. Ethan Blake found redemption, not in wealth, not in the empire he once ruled, but in the heart of a nurse from a small town, a woman who loved with a bravery greater than any fortune. And Lily found her forever, not by chasing a dream of power, but by daring to stand in the fire twice, by believing in the man she saw beneath the mask. If this story touched you, if it made you cry, if it made you believe again that love can rise even from ashes, then let your heart speak. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that true love is worth every risk. And do not forget to rate this story from 0 to 10, because your voice is what keeps these stories alive. And most of all, if you felt even one tear fall, if you felt that stirring deep inside that says love is still out there waiting, then hold on to it. Because one day, just like Lily and Ethan, you will find that the fire meant to destroy, you can be the very fire that lights your new dawn.